Hello everyone, welcome to my video on non-duality. I just wanted to start off by saying that this is my very first video on this subject, so forgive me if there's moments of quietness or awkwardness or anything like that. One thing that I am very grateful for as far as watching other non-duality speakers is that they seem to be very comfortable when they can't think of something to say, or when it gets quiet, or when no one's asking them any questions or anything. I also want to say that as far as non-duality goes, depending on how much you already know about this, I want to make it very clear that my sense of me, depending on which teacher you listen to, the sense of I, sense of still feeling like a person, is very much still happening here. However you want to say that, the apparent me is definitely still happening here. So I don't want to be misleading in any way in saying that the me has dropped away, or that I have gotten to this so-called state that many of these teachers will say that they are currently in, or that their me has fallen away. But this subject is extremely interesting to me, so I wanted to just go ahead and try talking about it anyway. This is something that I've been toying with for a while now, about starting to do videos. And like I said, this is my first one, and I gotta start somewhere, so I may as well start practicing this, whether that me drops away or not. And many of the non-duality teachers, they'll often talk about how they have nothing to offer, which, makes perfect sense to me, and I completely agree that in the end there is nothing to offer. But even though, for me, I am still stuck in the seeking mindset, I've still noticed a lot of different changes since I've started seeing the world in this way, and since I've been listening to these non-duality speakers. There's been a lot of change, and I would say that all of that change has been very positive. So even though this teaching doesn't actually give you anything, or it hasn't given me anything, I would still say from a relative standpoint there is somewhat of a benefit from exploring these ideas. And so that's kind of the perspective that I want to come at with this video, is the perspective of a seeker still. And as far as I can tell, the dropping away of the me seems to be almost entirely up to chance, you could say, ultimately, that many of these teachers say that nothing you do can get you there. So if that's the case, then it's really not up to me whether this happens or not. But like I said, there's still some things that I think are useful to talk about, even if the apparent me never does drop away. Probably the most helpful thing for me has just been seeing the, pointless is a strong word, but seeing the pointlessness to all of this that's happening. For many years, as far as I can really remember, I know back when I was a little kid, from what I understand, the me doesn't form really early on in life, so there's kind of an effortlessness of living, and life is just happening, and it's really hard to say that you could even have a problem with life ultimately when you're very young. But as far back as I can remember, as far back as my memory has been working, there's been somewhat of a sense of discomfort, dissatisfaction with life. And, of course, that has just caused me to seek and to work really hard at things and to try and achieve things and to continuously compare myself to other people, to try and solve this sense of dissatisfaction, which I would say is in basically everyone. Definitely not everyone. When I look out into the world and see different people, there's some people that don't really seem to experience this sense of dis-ease very much. And that could be either because they're just not aware enough to notice that life is fairly dissatisfying, or maybe the sense of being a separate person, which is what I'm claiming that the sense of dissatisfaction comes from, this sense of being a separate person. Maybe it's just not quite as strong in some people. So seeing the pointlessness, and I almost don't even want to use the word pointless because it's so much more beautiful than pointlessness. Pointlessness hints at something being a waste of time or something like that, but this is not that. This is definitely not that. It's pointless in the sense that you could never describe the point to what's happening. You could say that there is no point to what's happening in the most positive sense. It's free, it's open, it's wild, chaotic, random, sporadic, and ultimately beautifully impossible. And I'm talking about this. All of this right here. This is beautifully impossible. Now, of course, it's not actually impossible because it's undeniably happening. This right here. Watching a YouTube video. For me, it's talking into a webcam, which seems a little weird to me. I'm not used to talking into a webcam as if they're a real person. But that is undeniably what's happening. And obviously, well, maybe not so obvious to some people, but I'm not actually talking into a webcam. Those are just a couple words. They don't even come close to describing what is this. I don't even want to say what is happening, because this isn't happening. The closest word that I've heard any teacher say is this just is. And even that doesn't quite capture it. But I'd like to say that this is impossible, because there's no way for the mind to understand how this or how anything is happening. And all of the thousands of years of our species growing scientifically, through all that time, all the evolution that has happened, we have not gotten 1 inch closer to understanding how this is happening. So that's why I like to say it's impossible, even though it's not impossible at all, because it's all that's happening. It's completely undeniable. And in the same way that words can't describe how or what this is, words can't also describe what the point to this is. Both of those are equally impossible to do. You can't describe the point to this. You can't describe what it is. You can't describe how this is happening. We can definitely describe how things happen in here, like me picking up my mouse right here. There's supposed muscles happening, blood flowing, thoughts happening, going down to my arm, and I pick this up. That's a description of how this is happening, but that description is ultimately not true at all. all of that is just words. And what's happening, no matter what is happening, is, I like to say, impossible. Not impossible that it isn't happening, but impossible that it cannot be described. Cannot be successfully described, whether it's in a single word, in a whole paragraph, in a whole book, in a whole video. And I don't think it ever will be described. I think that is the edge of logic. That is as far as logic can take us, is describing. A lot of people would call it consciousness, even though if you listen to a lot of non-duality teachers, they say that even consciousness is an illusion. And that confused me a lot, honestly, when I first heard it, because I started with teachers like Eckhart Tolle and moved to Mooji, Adyashanti, can't remember the other one's name as of right now. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Rupert Spira. Rupert Spira. All excellent teachers, extremely fascinating, and one of their main messages is that consciousness is all there is. And that is so obvious when you really look into it. There's nothing that exists outside of consciousness. And everything is made up of consciousness. That's the only ingredient to reality. But in another sense, you could say that there is no consciousness, as in any idea that you come up about what consciousness is not it. Because no idea could exist without consciousness. So there's no idea within consciousness that could describe or capture this. You could call it consciousness if you want, but that word still doesn't get it. And as far as the sense of me falling away, that just doesn't really seem very important to me anymore. All the teachers will say that this is already it, and that's somewhat obvious. And even if the sense of me is still happening, this is still all there is, and this still doesn't get any better than this. But who's to say even what the sense of me is, even if it even exists ultimately, or if it's even there ultimately. But I will say there is still this sense of self-consciousness for me, the sense of, am what I saying, does it apply to people? Are they going to find it interesting? Is it bad if I don't make this video well enough? And that would be really nice if all that would just shut up. That'd be great. So, even though I'm speaking from, if you're still a seeker, which I imagine you probably are if you're looking into videos like these, then I'm speaking from the same place that you are, really. But I don't see, when I originally wanted to make these videos, there's something inside of me saying, you know, I don't have the authority to do this yet because the sense of me is still here. I don't in a sense know what I'm talking about. But like I said, I still think there's a lot of supposed benefit that has happened in my life since I've been interested. And you could say more than interested. I've been, as they say, my head has been in the tiger's mouth for years now, which I know is a relatively short amount of time compared to a lot of people that get pulled into this for 20, 30, 40 years and still don't have this supposed experience of the me falling away, or you could say liberation or enlightenment. I would like to see if we could avoid those words, is because so many people are so skeptical about enlightenment or liberation or even this sense of me being a real thing that can fall away. And that makes perfect sense to be skeptical about all of that. But still, even though that has not happened to me, or to the supposed me, or to the not me, however you want to word it, there's still been so much benefit in my life from letting go of all of these ideas about creating a good life, trying to live up to something, trying to achieve something that will ultimately prove my existence worthwhile. A lot of this is very subconscious. It's not, a lot of times doesn't even necessarily come up to a real sentence, real words in your mind that would say, I'm doing this because I want to feel fulfilled. A lot of that is just subconscious, and it just comes out in your actions because you just feel unfulfilled. And we think that feeling unfulfilled is just part of being human, which it is, of course. But we think that it's inherently part of life, and that in order for life to make sense, or for life to have value, we have to go out and make it have value. Otherwise it's meaningless and pointless and waste of time. And the crazy part is people who achieve so much more than I've ever achieved still feel depressed, still commit suicide, still become addicted to things. And that's because it's become so obvious that the mind just is not built to be satisfied. One of my favorite metaphors is, I don't remember who said it, probably a lot of people, but it's like trying to fill up a bucket with a hole in the bottom. You can get the bucket somewhat full. If you really pour a lot of water into it really fast, it can start to appear to be full. But then a couple seconds goes by, and it's empty again. And that is a perfect metaphor for us trying to create happiness by doing things in life. And a lot of people don't really see any problem with this, and ultimately there is no problem with it. I'm not saying that there is a problem with it, because there's definitely not. There's ultimately no problem with anything happening. No problem with anything. So I'm not coming from a place of saying that what's happening is incorrect and it needs to be corrected. It's just that myself personally, I began to feel very unsatisfied with life, just continuing on this treadmill with the belief that I'm actually getting somewhere. It became very dissatisfying to the point where doing things didn't even fill up my bucket anymore, supposedly. Maybe put a small drop in my bucket, and then it just dropped right out immediately. And that's what a lot of people experience when they start to feel depressed, that everything in life stops doing it for them anymore. It stops giving them what they're searching for. And people think that there must be something wrong with the chemistry in my brain, but this is actually them starting to realize that this whole game of searching for things and achieving things and improving yourself is completely pointless. And that can be one of the most depressing realizations that happens to anyone. Realizing that nothing you do is going to fix the unfulfillment. Most people, actually I don't know about most, but the numbers seem to be kind of shifting. More and more people seem to be aware of how this game just doesn't work very well. But a lot of people will just go their entire life running on this treadmill, imagining that they're going somewhere, and then subtly feeling unfulfilled, achieving something, subtly feeling unfulfilled, achieving something, and they just go their entire life running on this treadmill, and it's perfectly fine. And it is perfectly fine. This message is really just for people that are to a point where they want to explore and see how this is happening, why this is happening, what are the mechanics behind this supposed unfulfillment that doesn't seem to have any real reason behind it. Because there's a lot to explore behind that idea. So that's why I'm making this video, even from the point of still being a seeker, is because even if my supposed me never falls away, which I have no control over anyway, there's still been so much improvement from switching to the perspective of realizing that, one, I'm not in control of what's happening, not any control at all, which is a very disturbing message to some people. Two, there's nothing I can do to ultimately make life better. There can be an illusion of making life better, a short feeling of making life better, but that is completely imagined. And that can also be another thing that's very hard to accept. Maybe there's just two. And it's hard to even describe really how my life has improved. I would have to go back into my past and say how bad things were, which, I mean, they weren't horrible. There's a lot of people with a lot worse past than me. All I can say is that I just felt like I was useless in the world and that I had no meaning, which is funny because in a way that is true, and that is its own way out of that, is seeing that I am meaningless and this is meaningless. That is actually true. It's funny. But from the perspective of a person, it wasn't, I guess you could say, a positive way of looking at that. It was all purely negative because I thought that I had to mean something. I guess that's probably the biggest difference, is I had a need for purpose and a need for meaning. So that way, once I began to see the obvious truth that there is no meaning and there is no purpose, then those needs were left unsatisfied. And so I guess if I could describe what has changed, is those needs are no longer so strong. The need for meaning, need for purpose, need to be liked, need for survival, even to a certain degree. Obviously the mind, the entire body is built to survive, and that's gonna happen and gonna carry on its own. But as far as the ideas behind death and the ideas behind survival, they don't seem to be nearly as powerful. They don't create such a powerful emotional response anymore. Which I would say is all positive, or apparently positive. Because everything still carries on the same. I still achieve just as much, if not more. Which all of this just ends up being backwards. Everything just ends up being backwards to what we're taught. I still survive just as well, if not better. My diet has definitely improved. That's something that I found a natural inclination to be drawn towards is healthy food and a healthy diet. And that's just, really when it comes down to it, that's just entertaining. That's not, I don't do that to become something, which is always unsatisfying. That whole story of I'm doing this to become a better person always leads to dissatisfaction. But I just do it because of no reason, really, would be the most accurate way to describe it. There's no reason that there's no reason that I achieve things. There's no reason why I stay physically fit. There's no reason why I eat healthy. There's no reason why I maintain an excellent relationship with my wife, which seemed impossible 5 or 6 years ago. And with any other relationship I had, it began to seem really impossible to stay satisfied in a relationship for ever, really. I don't see any limit to it with the way it is now, because it's not happening for something. That could be another area that I touch on this video, is relationships, because from what I see from my very biased perspective, just being me, I don't see hardly anyone with a good relationship. And obviously my ego wants to go ahead and claim and say that mine is so great, which I genuinely do think that it is. I think it's perfect. I don't really ultimately see any way that it could be better than it is. But obviously I don't want to become attached to that idea that I have this thing figured out that nobody else has figured out. It's just when I look out into the world, when it comes to relationships, everybody is doing it pretty much the same way. Everybody is living in a sense of need from their partner. They need something from the relationship, which I think is ultimately why it always fails, because you're never going to be able to get that sense of satisfaction, fulfillment, completeness from another person, because they're never going to be everything that you want them to be. And we wrap our identity around our relationships so much and so tightly. I don't know if there's anything in the world that we create an identity around more than our relationships. And that's another really big downfall. Another really big reason why there seems to be so much dissatisfaction in the world with relationships, and so much failed relationships, and so much people that create, whether a little bit or a lot, of codependency in their relationship from the fear of not being in a relationship, from the fear of being single. That kind of forces people together and keeps them together, because the only other option in their mind would be to break up, which is extremely painful, extremely hard, and then you have to go back to being single, and in your mind, back to being incomplete. And even if that person is doing bad things in the relationship, for that to come out, at least this is how it felt for me, this may not be for everyone. Like, let's say you're being cheated on or abused or something in that nature, that is extremely embarrassing and damaging to our sense of self. So to even deal with that problem, there's going to be so much negative emotions that are going to come from that. A lot of times it's just avoided, or it's dealt with in a very unhealthy way. And for me, when my relationship finally turned into what I believe relationships are supposed to be, essentially, enjoyable, loving with no expectation, is when I read the book by Noah Elkrief, A Guide to the Present Moment, which, looking back at it from where I'm at now, that book comes off as a little cheesy, as a little salesman-like, and that's definitely true. But for me at the time, it was exactly what I needed, because I was still living in so much illusion, living in the illusion that I can make choices to make my life better, and the illusion that all of this matters. That, well, first of all, I would have never listened to someone like Tony Parsons or Jim Newman, Andreas Mueller, with such a direct, uncompromising message. I would have never heard that message from where I was. So I needed this kind of, I like to call it non-duality light, because it recognizes that there still is a person there, even though that's not true. It still plays along with that story as if there really is still a person there with a supposed life that can be improved. And I feel like most people will need to start with some sort of non-duality light. I would say Eckhart Tolle is kind of that same way. It's kind of intro to non-duality, which if I listen to them now, I can see that all of the core concepts are still there, besides the fact that they're telling you to do something and to practice something. That isn't going to help, but that's what I'm saying. They still acknowledge the person, because the person wants direction, they want guidance. So those people, Noah Elkrief, Eckhart Tolle, Mooji, even Adyashanti to a degree, they still give the person something to do. But for me, reading that book, go, out. Reading that book improved my relationship massively, and that's because he basically takes the focus of a relationship from getting something to just simply giving something. And if your focus is on the giving of love rather than the receiving of love, then it becomes perpetual motion. It feeds itself. It doesn't need anything. It never needs to be fixed or improved, because all there is the giving, and there's no worrying about whether you're getting something back in return. And just the simple realization that no one has anything to give you. Ultimately, no one can give you anything. A relationship can't give you something. In other words, if you're single or if you're in a relationship, the quality of life is the exact same. There's no benefit to either one. This one's fully complete and fulfilled from an ultimate standpoint, even though it may not feel that way. From an ultimate standpoint, the actual truth is being single is equally as fulfilling as being in a relationship, good relationship or bad relationship. They're all equally complete and fulfilled. And I mean, one of the biggest reasons why we have such a problem with relationships is because our brain is programmed to think that relationships are survival. If you don't find a partner, then you don't pass on your genes, and essentially you end at that point. The whole point of evolution is to pass on genes. And so if you end up being single, your mind interprets that as being dead. It's the same thing. If you end up alone, then your mind is going to interpret that as you might as well be dead, which is how it feels, really. If you get cheated on, or if your partner leaves you or something, you get betrayed by your best friend, or it feels similar to dying. And a lot of people, I would say, have killed themselves because of that, or have gone into a deep depression because of that. So if all of this sounds like mumbo jumbo to you, you've never heard of non-duality, then I would recommend reading that book. I still do recommend it to people, even though it gives you step-by-step instructions. Here's what to do, which I do not agree with that mentality of giving someone directions anymore. I would still recommend that book to people because the ideas behind it are very true, very on point, and can literally deconstruct the whole way that you see reality and see meaning to things that don't actually have meaning. So my relationships have definitely improved. I would say this is almost unrelated to non-duality, but in a way you could say it's directly related, is that my artistic inspiration has increased a lot, which again is not something to become attached to. It's not something to try and create. You don't want to try and create artistic expression, because then you're literally getting in the way of natural artistic expression happening. I would say that for me, the greatest inspiration, and whether it be talking or I make music, I like to spin poi, if anyone knows what that is, spin fire, spin staffs, definitely in love with that. I would say some of the best inspiration for those things and in conversations are just happen when you aren't trying to make anything happen. Which in a way I can kind of feel that happening with this video, because I don't want to try and force this, because that's really easy for people to pick up on. You don't have to be that sensitive to see that someone is trying to force something because they're trying to get something out of it, which of course, like I said, my sense of me is still here. It's still thinking, is this going well? Is this going to look good when I post it on the video? Are people going to think I'm crazy when I see it? But I can see that none of that really matters. It'd be, like I said, it'd be fantastic if that type of thing went away and I could kind of just be in the moment without constantly considering what I'm saying or if it sounds good. That would be fantastic experience, or lack of experience, no experience, depending on what teachers you listen to. But back to my original point, those things, those voices I can see don't matter anymore, which helps incredibly with art, because when I was making my album, there was millions of thoughts flying through my head of, is this going to be successful? Are people going to like it? And there was a lot of really personal things I put on that album, and is kind of like, am I okay with opening to myself up on this personal of a level? You know, should I even post these songs? They really say a lot about me. But I can see now that none of that means anything. And a lot of that kind of creates a sense of fear, like, is it going to be good enough? And it's like, ooh, dang, maybe I should just withdraw. Maybe I should just not do this, not open up so much. And that sense of fear can be increased when you think that what you're doing is really actually important. That's the thing. My whole album, it felt very important to my ego, but the entire way I was reminding myself that this isn't actually important at all. Whether it becomes famous, whether no one listens to it, all of that, it's not important. Just the same with this video. If nobody watches it, or if hundreds of thousands of people watch it, which I highly doubt, either way is not very important. And so even though I can say that my sense of me is still here, there's still a lot of things that have shifted simply from watching and listening and contemplating all of these non-dual concepts, and even I could say to the point where you're a little bit past concept. It's your experience, it's direct experience for a lot of these things, because the concepts are very interesting, but the concepts are like walking up a staircase, and it can only take you up to that last step, but every once in a while you get to outside of the concept. The concepts have carried you outside of the concepts, and that's when it's no longer like, is this true or is this not true? It's not even in the realm of true or false anymore. It's directly experiential. And so that's why I want to make this video, because I think that a lot of amazing things can happen just from seeing these ideas. Whether this thing we're in control of or not in control of at all, this supposed enlightenment or liberation or the me falling away, whether that happens or not, I feel like the focus can be completely taken off of that. When I look at non-dual things, it seems like everyone is focused on the me falling away, or the shift happening, or the experience of being one happens. Everyone seems to be trying to get to that, which the more I learn about this, it seems to be that the more you're trying to get to that, the less likely you are to get to that, you could say. The trying is what is in the way of the arriving, you could say. So that's why, at least for now, I want to take the shift, take the perspective, the focus, and shift it off of those things which may or may not happen, and I can't even say for sure whether those are real things. I mean, from my perspective, well, I could get into this a little bit, but as far as what I'm experiencing, I cannot confirm or deny anything that those people claim. There was something else I wanted to say, but I can't remember. I think it would be very interesting if, and this is all obviously a very egotistical almost type of idea, but from all the videos that I've seen, I've never seen someone that was there go from someone who wasn't there anymore, if you know what I mean. I haven't seen someone that had the me in some videos and then went to a place of not having a me anymore. So I feel that would be very interesting if that happened here. I feel like a lot of people would be interested in that. I know I would be very interested in seeing that happen to someone else, seeing the shift happen and listening to them describe the shift. So that is one idea that has come to my mind of why it might be interesting to shoot these videos, although I will say that is very egotistical, and I do not want to get attached to that happening, or that sense of being special, being the first person to record this, or I want to just get it completely away from that. But I think I'll probably bring this video to an end pretty soon here, but there's one more thing that I did want to say as far as glimpses go. There has been a few very, very minor experiences in my life which has kind of made me realize that there is more truth to this than I had originally thought. I'm just a very skeptical person, so if someone comes up to me and says they're enlightened, my mind is just like, okay, whatever you say. Whatever you say, dog. But the first one I can think of was more than a year ago, probably almost 3 years ago, I'd say. But nothing really happened, but I was meditating, because I used to think meditating was really important. And it just dawned on me that everybody is already enlightened, if that's the word you want to use. Everyone is already exactly what they are. Everyone is already fully conscious, fully awake, fully experiencing, fully being impossible. Everyone is already impossible, you could say, even though it's not impossible, because obviously here it is, but this is already where everyone is at. And that was just, you could call it a realization that kind of gave me some energy and some relief, you could say. No shift in perception happened there. No, definitely still felt like there was me and there was still people out in the world who were this. And I guess I don't need to talk about those, but something that happened to me just a few weeks ago, which I think is about as close as, definitely as close as I've gotten to what these non-dual teachers talk about, which was, I was listening to a video from Andreas Mueller, which is, if I have to pick favorites, I'd probably say he's my favorite. I started listening to Tony Parsons, which was just like, whoa. Like, wow, this is extremely direct and it is undeniably true. And then I started listening to Jim Newman, and I was like, man, you are an asshole. In the best kind of way. You are just a dick. But it's like, I feel like I have that dick inside of me. I have that asshole thing inside of me, which I just constantly just be like, nope, put that, just take that, tuck it away somewhere else. I can't be that, even if it meant avoiding the truth. I can't be an asshole, even if it meant being true, you know. And he kind of showed me that you don't have to be nice to people. You can tell them they're wrong and that what they're talking about has nothing to do with this. And obviously he's not a real asshole, but just his directness and his lack of concern for what other people thought he should be doing was inspirational to me. And then I ran into Andreas Mueller, which is probably the least popular out of all of them, but he was just so skillful and relatable to the seeking mindset. Like, this has happened to me a lot with non-duality, where whether you're reading a book or watching a video, they're literally narrating what is happening in your mind at that moment. And they're walking through like, oh, now look at this, and now look at this, now this is happening. Now you probably think you're special because of this happening. And you're like, oh my God, they're telling me exactly what's happening. And I've had a lot of experiences with Andreas Mueller, and he's a little more on the friendly side, but still very cutthroat and straight to the point. And obviously Richard Sylvester, fantastic. Kenneth Madden, who I've recently started listening to, fantastic. Lisa Cairns, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. She's really great too, although she gets a little bit too much on the spiritual side of things, chakras and that, and I just don't have any experience with that, so I just don't know. But I was listening to a video from Andreas Mueller, and there was kind of a sinking in, and it's actually, I wouldn't say it's a sinking in, it's almost more like a being pulled out. Like, it feels like I'm in here, but it's like kind of just that sense of being in here and there being things out here. It became very, very thin, very almost non-existent, and very, like, right now it feels like there's me inside of these arms, and there's like kind of a sucked in feeling of where it's like I'm here and I'm not here, like that. I began to see that there is, I am this. I obviously can still feel this, but it's almost like something extends beyond, like that. It's very empty, very hollow sort of thing that just kind of felt like it was more expansive. And I know a lot of the times non-dual teachers avoid the word real. They say this is real and unreal, which is very good at describing what they're trying to describe. But for me, everything felt so much more real. Not in the sense that it had a definition to it, not that I'm staring at a real webcam right there, but the webcamness of it, the undeniable impossibility, the experiential side of it became so much more vivid, I guess is a way. And there was still thoughts happening in my mind, which actually at the time I realized that the thoughts were not the problem at all. That any sort of attempt to stop the thoughts or control the thoughts was only getting in the way of what this new perspective that was starting to arise, which I had no control of whatsoever. But of course the mind was trying to say, I am making this happening, I am in control, and I want to increase this even more. And I guess you could say that's a glimpse. It was just very spacious, felt very real, very... And another thing I realized from that is that it's not pleasure that we're really looking for. The mind is programmed to search for pleasure, and we think that pleasure is happiness, but that sense of vividness and realness, that was beyond pleasure and pain, and beyond. It's in a different category. It's not in the same category of opposites of pleasure or pain. It's not on that scale anymore. It's fulfilled is a pretty good word to describe it. Everything just felt like the very existence of it was enough already. That there didn't need to be a meaning to the existence of it. The vividness and the realness to everything, which I was just feeling my thoughts happening. I was feeling my body. I was laying in bed, eyes closed. I was feeling the words of his video. I had headphones in, coming into my ears. And if you've ever done psychedelics, that's the only thing I can compare it to is LSD or mushrooms or DMT. There's sometimes a sense of just quietness and beingness and vividness, and all of these words don't even come close to it, but you may kind of know what I'm talking about. It definitely did remind me of LSD. In a similar way, but also a different way. That lasted for maybe about 10 minutes and then slowly faded away as my mind was like, no, where are you going? Come back. So I guess you could say that's about as glimpsy as I've gotten. And of course, along came with that was, ooh, I must be getting close to this now. That means, which obviously I've heard people say that, and I've heard teachers say it was just an experience. Don't hold on to it. It didn't mean anything. You didn't do it. So as much as I can, I've tried to just kind of let that go off into the past and go back to this perception that whether it happens or not really doesn't matter. Alright, I don't know how long I've been recording, but I feel that I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, being the first video. I want to thank anyone who's checked this out, listened to it. I'll probably be doing a video once a week from now on with this same kind of perspective. So if you want, go ahead and subscribe. If not, thank you for joining me.